So folks, here we are at the Community Cats Pyramid. And Kristen, if you can keep a little lookout on the questions box for me, just in case folks have questions, that would be fantastic. So I can focus on the pyramid. And I'm always looking for questions, thoughts, reviews, ideas on the Community Cat Pyramid. I feel like it's a pretty strong way of being able to clarify how we are utilizing our programs in our communities and how we are working with our community to help with creating a better life, better care for the community cats that we have. So today I would like to propose that Spay Neuter Knows No Color and how using the Community Cat Pyramid ensures you are treating everyone fairly. And so I'm going to just run through the Community Cat Pyramid a little bit here for folks, because some folks might not be familiar with it. And then we will, I'll take some questions from folks, see if they have any thoughts or ideas. But to give you the Cliff Notes version at the end of the day, I feel very strongly that our priority programs should be assisting the owned cat population, which is down at the base of the pyramid. But how I'm going to start this story is going back into my early days with the Merrimack River Feline Rescue Society. We were started back in 1992. The adoption center opened up in 1994, very much focused on a trap neuter return for the feral cats that were on the Newburyport waterfront in 1992. So it was very much of a spay neuter focus. However, at that point in time, there were 300 cats on the waterfront, and there were about 100 to 120 kittens living on the waterfront too. So at that point in time, they also became a rescue and adoption organization. So very quickly, we went from a spay neuter focused organization into an organization that does rescue and adoption by default. Usually when you are doing trap neuter return, you are not returning 100% of the cats. So there are cats that are at risk, that are at need, kittens that do need to come in and do need further assistance and support. And I acknowledge that, and I totally believe that there is a need for that service. But I also feel like we may stress most of our resources, put most of our resources in that rescue and adoption category. And we really need to focus more on assisting the owned cat population, giving them the access to spay neuter services. So in my discovery in the 1990s, throughout this whole process, I was always very concerned about the fact that we could not offer services to owned cats. People would call us all the time and say, you know, I've got a mom cat, I've got a litter of kittens, you know, my cat's outside spraying, I can't afford to get the cat spayed or neutered. And back in the 90s, we really couldn't offer them anything other than, you know, say, try to work out a deal with your local veterinarian. And it's really important that those cats have access to spay neuter, because then they're not going to potentially, their families are not going to be potentially forced to make decisions that you know, aren't best for everybody, for the family, for the cat or cats and the kittens. And so, you know, we really want to try and put tools into the community that's going to assist them in being able to help the cat population in their own backyard. So for those of you that are part of an adoption program and adoption organizations, and those of you also who were able to attend our fundraising day yesterday, Natalie from Get Fully Funded, she was talking about, here's this 110, 1,000 ratio that is their thought in terms of how to effectively spend your resources for fundraising. You know, having one special event, having 10 grant applications, having 1,000 donors in your donor list. And I would like to recommend that when your organization is thinking about planning towards 2022, to utilize this pyramid as a way of saying, you know, we're going to assist, say, 100 cats for adoption, but then we're going to scale up and assist 500 cats in the owned cat population, or we're going to collaborate with a group that will do that too. I feel very strongly too that in rescue and adoption, we do tend to have more barriers to participation and entry. We have adoption applications, we have adoption questionnaires, and in those questionnaires, there are barriers for adopting. There's also, we do limit ourselves sometimes on terms of our rescue to just certain regional areas. And I am a fan of targeted programs, but I'm also a fan of programs that have a greater outreach too. The other thing too is when we are doing rescue and adoption, we're holding on to these cats for a much longer period of time. An owned cat population, we're really not the owners, we're just helping assist with providing services. So, it's a really different relationship with the cat, with the folks. And a program I'm involved with in the Chelsea area, we pay for spay neuter services for owned cats, but I don't even know the people. I don't even know who they are. They're just going immediately through a program. They make their own appointments. There's no, strict approval process. They just go, they get their cats done, bills paid by us, and, the cats are back. And so there's really no requirement information. There's no barrier there. Folks that are doing trap, neuter, return on their own in sort of the neighborhood cat style too, those barriers are also reduced quite a bit. And the more people that are doing trap, neuter, return, the more people that are, getting their cats spayed and neutered on their own is a much more scalable program than having us being involved with rescue and adoption, one cat at a time. Sanctuary relocation, looking at the tip top of that pyramid. That's so labor intensive. For those of you who haven't run a sanctuary, I have had the opportunity to run a sanctuary, and it's extremely labor intensive and expensive. So it's something definitely to think about and reconsider. If that's how your organization is operating, that's great. If that's your mission, that's your focus, that's wonderful. But if your objective in the community is to reduce the cat overpopulation, reduce the barriers that folks have in terms of access to care, you'd want to be putting more of your resources in the lower part of the community cat pyramid there. It sounds like, based on that poll I did earlier, it sounds like folks have a lot of experience in all components of the pyramid. And I'm not 100% sure if we are thinking about that access to care for the owned cat population. That is becoming so much more challenging too right now because of the shortage, we'll say, of veterinarians and technicians. I think every day I'll get an email about a clinic that is being forced to close or cut back on services because they've either lost technicians or they've lost veterinarians. Either they're pulling out of the workforce or they're going on leave and they can't find a replacement person. So when I crafted the community cat pyramid several years ago, I felt like this was going to be an easy problem to solve with regards to assisting the owned cat population, but now there's a lot more challenging situations, which is getting that care, that volume of care. There are private practice veterinarians that are not accepting new clients. So even if you can afford the care, you can't even get in. And I would be interested to know, folks, if you can put into that questions box, if you're running into this issue in your communities with regards to access to veterinary services. I'm assuming the answer is yes, but if there is somebody out there that says no, and we have that solution to the problem, I would love to find out more about what you're doing in that part of the country. So, I guess it has to do with the human touch and involvement. And, Sterling and I touched upon it a little bit in our conversation earlier today where, do we want to come into a community and have a program, or do we want the community itself to work on the overall wellness, health and wellness of cats? I hate referring like cat overpopulation problem. I don't think of it as a problem. I think of it as it's just a community needing to access resources. So how do we work on getting some resources for that community to be able to better serve the cats there. And so I try to think about that from that way. And when you think about rescue and adoption, I think of that as more as like we go in and we come out, where I think of some trap neuter return models, as well as return to field and assisting the own cat population. Those areas are very much, what kind of programs can we create? And one other point that came up in yesterday's conversation, which was, thinking about a nonprofit as a low revenue business, and that's not a sustainable model. So let's create a model of a business that can really be replicated in any community. Sort of like, I would like the franchise chain model of having supportive programs for our cats in all communities that's easily replicated, and would be able to, regardless of what cat, what type of what person you are, anything, what your gender is, what your race is, any of those economic status, and that we have a scale to work with to be able to help those. I know that there are some franchises out there that have, like Panera, they have done a couple of models where it's pay as you go or pay as you feel like it. And so those are a couple of interesting models that we could really look at to try and address this issue. Align Care, Dr. Blackwell, he was my first podcast this year. And if you haven't listened to that podcast, I'd highly recommend that you tune into that episode, talking about different ways of working with other organizations and getting them to partner up together in a relationship to be able to better serve our cats, and in his case, cats and dogs. One other thing too to think about is, insurance, and should we have insurance for our pets, as we would think about with regards to health insurance for our family. So does the pet become part of the family and fall within insurance? And that's another question that we have. And there's a lot of barriers involved with regards to insurance. So that's it's a huge, huge question. I'm going to pause right here because I've kind of thrown out a lot of heavy topics. Want to see if there are any questions in the questions tab. Kristen, are you seeing anything?
I do. So somebody asked if there are legal issues that you need to be concerned with paying for vet services for owned cats. And in Chelsea specifically, do you get discounted services for those owned pets, or do you pay retail for that?
So with regards to Chelsea, we do get we use a low-cost spay neuter clinic. So we utilize the rate that they use for those low-cost services. So it's $75 a cat that we pay. So that, I don't know, depending on where you are, sometimes that's very low cost in Massachusetts. So that's what we pay. We also do offer in Chelsea too a subsidized, we do a copay for dogs. So I think that the charge is like $150 and we pay $75 on that. And then we do free vaccine clinics, for vaccine and microchipping clinics for owned cats and dogs in Chelsea. If you look up Chelsea, Massachusetts, and look up their socioeconomic and diversity and all that stuff, it's really an interesting city. You feel free to look all that information up on Mr. Google or Mrs. Google. And also, they have been trying some of the like the monthly payments, universal payment system. There's a foundation that's been involved in doing some of that there. So it's really quite interesting. We also do trap neuter return there, and we do some rescue, but we are not an adoption group. So we have transfer partners and transfer out. So there have been a lot of kittens that have come out of Chelsea this year. So that's Chelsea. And then the other question with regards to the owned cat situation. So you do need to have the owner of the cat represent. So you can't just like say, give me your cat, I'll go get it spayed and neutered and bring it back. If it's an owned cat, there has to be a direct relationship in most states, at least my awareness is. you need to have there needs to be a relationship between the veterinarian and the owner. So there's usually certain paperwork that has to be filled out. But we have there are some volunteers that do like a spay neuter shuttle that they have called, and so they'll have the paperwork, they have the owner fill out the paperwork, but the transport is provided by a volunteer. They bring the cat to the clinic, and then if there are any questions, they know they can text or call the owner and go from there. So hopefully that helps. We do have to work really hard to ensure that if it's a Spanish speaking person, that we have folks that are able to do the translation and that kind of stuff.
Is there any particular reason why you picked Chelsea? Like when you were talking about looking up their socioeconomic stats and demographics and so forth, was choosing Chelsea based on that, or was it just Chelsea sounded like a good plan?
So yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of the communities, after we got Salisbury and Newburyport kind of under control, then I then bounced over to Lowell, Massachusetts, and we can look at Lowell. And at that point in time, I had a lot of support from PetSmart Charities. We were just starting the Catmobile. That was back in 2007, 2008. So I went and worked in Lowell, and that community went from being way overwhelmed within 5 years. They were like, kitten, what's a kitten? I don't know what a kitten is anymore. And then I worked over in Fitchburg. So I created a community group out of Fitchburg, Massachusetts. And then Chelsea, the reason Chelsea came my way, I used to run these meetings called the Boston Homeless Cats Group meetings. And while I was doing the Lowell and Fitchburg and those projects, another organization was working on Dorchester, Chelsea, Mattapan, which is south of Boston. And so the work was sort of being done already in that area. But at these Boston Homeless Cats meetings, everybody was saying, Chelsea needs help, Chelsea needs help, Chelsea needs help. So I guess I would say a group of advocates for those cats and that community came our way. And in essence, the rescue or some of the work that's happening in Chelsea has gotten over into East Boston and Lynn and the other surrounding communities. So, it's not, you don't work in a vacuum. I mean, it's like there's each cat. It was funny when I used to do targeted grant projects, people would be like, well, I trapped a cat like half a mile over the city limits. Does it count can I count it for this town? And it's like, yes, I mean, it's, you do your best efforts. You just don't want to be spread too thin. And it all depends on what your volume is, for sure.
Gotcha. I think that's it as far as questions at the moment, unless anybody else wants to. Oh, there is a question here that's not showing very well. I'm going to read this verbatim because it just popped up. Regarding low-cost spay neuter for owned cats, do they require ear tips? Problem here is that many owned cats can only get into low-cost TNR services that require ear tips.
That's a great question. In my experience, the owned cats do not get ear tips. If you are doing an ear tip, I mean, it is to be identified as a community cat and not necessarily an owned cat. And so technically, I mean, you should have your cat either microchipped or a collar of some kind. So some kind of very, a collar, ideally breakaway collar for visible identification. My experience is an ear-tipped cat is a community cat, one that is probably fed by multiple people and does not have a dedicated owner. However, with all of that being said, as you'll see my picture with Hooch, who is a cat that was my own personal cat, certainly had an ear tip on his left ear. He went through a spay neuter clinic with the intention that he was going to be returned back to his colony in Lowell, Massachusetts. And he had a wound of unknown origin and had to spend 6 months with me. And then at that point in time, he became, a member of our family. So I think that there is a very gray area with regards to the ear tipping. But the intention of the ear tipping from a clinical standpoint is that those are trap, neuter, return cats, and they're not owned cats that are in somebody's house. But Again, I will say that a community cat is 4 paws on the asphalt. And if you have an indoor-outdoor owned cat, I mean, it may be okay to have an ear tip. So I'd say it's very gray, and it's a really, really great question. And it's one that folks are very conflicted about, because there have been spay-neuter clinics for community cats, and a cat's been trapped and the cat's been returned and it's ear tipped, and it's turned out it has an owner, and that really causes a lot of stress.
Gotcha. In terms of working with vets, so if you're, would you suggest that people who are trying to get owned cats spayed or neutered take them to they don't go through the same clinic as a TNR cat that would be, a feral or a community cat that was intended to go back out? So these would be owned cats that they know they have an owner or somebody caring for, and those are kind of 2 separate categories, would you say?
Yeah, so there's different processes. So a community cat's going to come in a trap, or a TNR, trap neuter return feral cat's going to come in a trap, where an owned cat ideally has a designated owner, and ideally too, I'm going to say the cats in Chelsea, when we first started, everybody was like, oh, no one's going to want to drive 30 minutes away to bring a cat to get spayed or neutered, and they do about 30 or so a month, and we've been doing that for years. So there are people finding a way to get there. We don't have, it's not being coordinated by volunteers or anything like that. It's just basically the owner is bringing their own cat into the veterinarian. So it's a very different process, a very different timeline. Usually with trap neuter return, you're doing 20 cats, they're all in traps. This one's from Smith Street, this one's from J Street or whatever, where the owned cat comes in a carrier. Usually the owner is the one bringing the cat into the clinic. They have the direct relationship with the vet. It's just they're not paying either the full bill or part of the bill. There is a subsidy amount in there, but it's a more direct relationship with the veterinarian. And I feel that if we can get those owned cats spayed and neutered, then the TNR population out there is going to dwindle substantially.
Gotcha. I think that's it for questions at the moment. If you want to continue talking about the pyramid.
Yep. So I want to add another thing too, is so when it got to be around 2008, we had been doing in Massachusetts, we had been doing spay neuter for feral cats since 2000. Anybody could come in for free. We were doing monthly clinics. We would get like between 80 to 110 cats per monthly clinic for those feral cat spay neuter clinics. And the intake statistics at the large shelters was not changing at all for adult cats. Kittens, we might have seen a bit of a drop, but really nothing for the adult cats. And so in 2008 was really the time when we decided to offer really affordable spay neuter services in the owned cat community. So it's really that's really the game changer. That's really the game changer in terms of reducing the number of cats that are out on the street, that are out in in colonies, reducing the kittens, reducing the kitten and the cat hit by car rates. You can do trap and neuter and return, rescue and adoption, sanctuary and relocation until you're, forever, and you're not going to see a change in a dramatic change in the intakes into your adoption programs until you are doing that, assisting the spay neuter of the owned cats and really doing it on a large scale. So I just wanted to point that out, how critically important the base of the pyramid is for success. I watched a documentary recently called Running Wild, Cats of Cornwall, and it's a profile of a community up in Canada and their trap neuter return program. And it's available on Amazon and I think iTunes and other places. And it's really thought-provoking, and it really exemplifies the challenges that we face all across in all of our areas, because we certainly do not have a full toolkit in our communities. there are, one or two people out there trapping cats, one or two people out there working with kittens, and extremely limited vet resources in those communities. It just was another example of the frustrations and how challenging our problem solving is. And so, when I got to 2007 and I realized we weren't moving the needle on our statistics, we needed to take a risk and create a new program that was going to be able to help do that. And I didn't know for sure, but creating the Catmobile mobile spay neuter clinic that went around to different communities, really, we just had to give it a try. And I'll be honest, it's less risky than running an adoption program and a rescue program. It certainly has challenges. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but it was less risky getting it going. And it had a much more significant bang for the buck in the communities. So if your organization is thinking at all about what you want to look like in a sort of a next generation and next step, if you can incorporate a high volume own cat spay neuter program, you are not going to go wrong for sure in that community. I know many people feel that the spay neuter story is past and we all know it, but I don't think we know it fully for the owned cat population. I don't feel like everybody in our communities has easy access to spay neuter for their cats. And again, in that questions box, please chime in and let me know what your thoughts are, because I feel passionately that way, that we still need to be pushing with regards to making sure we have spay neuter and wellness programs for our cats. Our clinics that used to be spay neuter clinics have now incorporated wellness and other services, and therefore the spay neuter has been diminished access. So we've lost even the volume that we used to have, and that's another big issue. And so, where we used to think we would get support from private practice veterinary clinics, and I think we still will, but I think it's going to be in different ways. But I think we still need to continue to create programs that will build capacity for more spay neuter for our cat owning population out there. Cat ownership is growing tremendously around the country, as well as I think millennials are increasing cat owners by far much more than dog owners. So I really think that we need to embrace this, but as nonprofit organizations, I think we need to look at solving this situation and providing more services within our own organizations versus outsourcing that, which creates lots of challenges, but I think we should not try. I think we should definitely try. Even if it is something saying, hey, maybe I don't have a veterinarian that I can work with, but maybe I can do a microchipping clinic. Maybe I can do something like that and just help with microchipping, so then people don't have to go to the veterinarians to get their cats or get their animals microchipped. One other thing I've been exploring too is like things like scanners. Maybe we should have scanners in the public libraries rather than at a veterinarian. So if somebody needs to, if they've got a stray cat that they want to see if somebody, owns or not, they can take out the scanner, get the scanner from the library, and they can scan the cat and then return it. So, there's some things that we can maybe offload from a veterinary practice to open up their time so that then they can do the surgeries. And certainly, in my dream world down the road, wouldn't it be great if we had a way to non-surgically sterilize our cats? And that would be really helpful, but I think that is several years down the road. So going back to the community cat pyramid, we have a PDF of this pyramid where you can put your logo, your organization's logo, if you need to use this pyramid with your board to help describe, maybe some direction as you're thinking about your plans for 2022, plans for going forward. Or even if you're talking with other groups in your state, I highly recommend collaborating and working together, trying to pull together groups in your state, so that if you have, say you have a bottle baby or a kitten foster organization, and then you have, a private clinic and maybe a spay neuter clinic or a TNR group, or, basically all the groups, get everybody in the room and say, well, how can we all work together to try and make this happen? there is I'm happy to work with anybody and their organization to talking about a community cat calculator, trying to figure out the number of community cats that you would need to spay neuter through TNR, as well as the owned cat population. I use different variables depending on the social vulnerability index, as well as what current resources have already been sort of put into the community to try and get a more accurate figure. Because sometimes if you work it through, you'll say human population, and you take about 12% of human population in that community, and that's the number of cats that you have that you need to be assisted. That's sort of like a mid-range, but that number would flex up and down depending on what current resources have been put into play. And I would think that you would want to get to know your social vulnerability index for your community. And I can put a link to that in the chat if you're interested in finding out more about the social vulnerability index too. That's part of sort of understanding your community needs assessment, which I'm not a fan of spending a ton of time on it. I'm a fan of looking up information, putting some information together, and just sort of understanding your community. But in reality, I think we have such a great need for access to care for cats that I think it's hard to go wrong. I have probably not met a shelter or veterinarian that's probably gone out of business because they just don't have enough business. I mean, they've certainly gone out of business because they haven't had enough money, but I don't think that they've gone out of business because they haven't had enough actual client interest. So I don't think that that's a question that we have to worry about today. Oh, great. It looks like Kristen has put up the pyramid PDF. So that's great. Thank you, Kristen. All right, and at this point in time, I think I will ask if folks have any other questions about the pyramid or how this might work in presenting to your board or the powers that be. Do you think that this makes sense? Do you think this doesn't make sense? And I'd really like to hear from folks to see if you have, just if this makes sense to you. This is just sort of what I'm thinking.
Interesting comment that's in here is that in Susan's area, she would switch the TNR level with the adoption rescue level, and that might be because COVID with more people adopting. Do you have thoughts on that?
You're in terms of thinking that there's more demand. Well, I know where you are, Sue. So there's been a lot of TNR done in the area that she is at. And so, yeah, I could see where that has been flipped around for you, for sure. And one thing that we don't have on this graphic is that we have some arrows on the side. So the trap neuter return component and return to field would get smaller then, but you still would have the assisting the owned cat population that continues, at least in the experience that I have with the Merrimack River Feline Rescue Society in what we call our service area. We do very little trap neuter return, very little. And we still do a lot of assisting of the owned cat population in our service area towns, and we certainly do a lot of adoption. Many of those cats are come in from outside of those service area towns, but there's also a desire for folks to adopt. So there's that question of, do we provide, supply into our communities where we've had a lot of aggressive spay neuter. So yep, I could say that would be a little bit different, or I would thin out that TNR level so it wouldn't be so thick in your area. And in some worlds, I could actually see that TNR practically just going into the assisting the owned cat population and almost phasing that section out.
Another comment that having a microchip scanner at the library is a great idea. The Carrie, who's made the comment, is the library director and has a scanner because she does TNR, and she never thought of adding that as a service. So it's nice that there's a public building where everybody can go that does more than just lend out books. She thought that was a great idea. question about transport in all of this. Where does that fall and how does it affect the pyramid in an area that they're doing a lot of transport?
Can I transport out or transport in?
Either way, just transport as a concept. Does
That
it fall under one particular section of the pyramid, or do you think that it alters some section of the pyramid in any way?
right. That's a fantastic question. It certainly does alter the pyramid. So, this is all about balance, organizational balance. And so you don't want to be an organization that is transporting in kittens when you have, lots of kittens in your community that need assistance. And so it's sort of trying to how to understand this. So where we may want to transport out if if you are overwhelmed locally. So I guess what I'm saying is in the pyramid here, eventually I would love to see numbers in here. So I'll just share with you what my numbers used to always be for MRFRS when I was sort of using this in my brain. We would commit to adopt out 400 to 500 cats a year. We would commit to TNR over 1,000 cats a year. We would commit to spay neuter 6,000 owned cats a year. Those were my benchmarks in my head, what I felt made sense in my community based on the demographics, based on the economic situation of everybody, based on where we were. And the Catmobiles service area, the owned cat service area was like Eastern Massachusetts. TNR was anywhere, but our rescue was limited. We scaled it down. However, we had a lot of rescue partners in the area that were also doing rescue. More people were doing rescue than they were doing trap, neuter, return, than they were doing assisting the owned cat population. So, that could be balanced out a little bit more. But for my organization, what our commitment was like 400 on the adoption side of things, over 1,000 on TNR, and then significantly higher, 6,000 on the owned cat population. So that was where we were on that. And the relocation numbers, we probably did like 20 or 30 barn cat relocations. And we had a sanctuary. We have Care for Life cats. So you could call those sanctuary, even though they're not like in a sanctuary, but they were in different foster homes. So you could think of it that way. And that was like 50 cats. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's sort of where my crunching mind went.
Gotcha. We have another question here, and I am going to read this one verbatim. Our primary mission at the Cat Ambassador is to provide low-cost and no-cost veterinary services, spay, neuter, vaccination, microchip, illness, injuries, and euthanasia, cremation of owned cats. Those are interesting things to include, actually. I'm the only such organization in the community that focuses on owned cat populations, and I cannot keep up with the demand. I agree the need is huge. This is in the Michigan area. So the need obviously is huge. How does one pitch this to donors to concentrate more on the owned cat population, cats that already, we don't need to adopt them out. We don't need to do anything to them. Well, they'll come in and get their thing done, and they'll go home to their owners already. It seems like that's a different sort of conversation that you might have to increase the availability. You obviously need money. How have you in the past brought that to donors and had a successful outcome from that conversation?
Right. So yeah, great service that you're providing. It sounds like a really wonderful program, and definitely, as you learn along the way, put it together in a book and a template and share it. Love to have you share about this at the United Spay Alliance conference, and we could have more groups, develop and grow, sort of like the Humane Alliance, which is now at the ASPCA, but there's, the more the merrier in terms of creating different types of models that we can share for other organizations to do this. In terms of the funding side of things, so that I'm a mixed emotions person on this one. So when I first thought about the Catmobile, thinking about it, I looked at retail pricing in my area, and I offered the services anywhere between a third to a half of what retail was doing. And I could create a break even, a little bit positive, operating in the black business model regarding that pricing. And then I would go to the grant funding, as well as fundraising, for those that needed extra subsidy support. So, I mean, a lot of people are willing to pay for services. And so that's why I sort of mentioned also that Panera sliding scale model. And I believe the Feral Cat Coalition out in Oregon, which they do TNR cats, but they have in the past also done some owned cat spay neuter too. But they are, I believe, a sliding scale. Not sliding scale, but they are a donation only model, and they've made it work, and they do several thousand cats. So you might want to check them out. They have a great program, been around a long time, and excellent resources there. But looking at your business model, I've kind of looked at it as saying, we're not full price, but we're not the totally free always. I think that there's certain areas where free or low cost is very valuable and important, and it might be a way to start out in a community if you're like in a mobile environment, but then you can scale up and get some revenue. So it all depends on the socioeconomics of each community that you're working with, and trying to think about that, as well as protecting yourself as a sustainable business model. But I'd be happy to talk with you more about that one-on-one to try and create a business model that is lasting and sustainable, and you're not going to just fizzle yourself out because you just don't have the funding isn't working right. Is that helpful? I think I lost Kristen. Kristen, are you there?
Oh, sorry, I had myself on mute because I was listening and didn't want to be breathing into the microphone. So I believe that answers the question. So next question was, how do you avoid competition and resistance with the veterinary practices in the area?
Yeah, that's it's a hot topic, but I think it's much of a less hot topic than it used to be. Because right now veterinarians are so incredibly overwhelmed, overstressed, overworked, that I think that they would actually warmly embrace a new program coming into place that is specifically focused on spay neuter surgeries. If you do start out focusing on wellness, that's a could be a problem, because that's where the profit margins are the highest in veterinary practices, is when they're doing the rabies vaccines and the office visit with the with the testing and that kind of thing. So you might find more resistance there, but if you operate with the focus and the desire with regards to the spay neuter services, and emergency care, I can't tell you how many emergency clinics, if you do incorporate that in, and that is a whole nother business model that you have to consider. That we have a lot that go on diversion, a lot of emergency clinics that go on diversion in the New England area. And so, that just drives me kind of crazy thinking about cats that need assistance and they just aren't getting access to emergency care. And it's certainly not affordable either. That's not even addressing the affordability issue for all of us. I mean, I think most of the organizations have to use emergency clinics too. And, you very rarely get much of a discount going through emergency clinics. But I think that whole competitive resistance is a little bit cooler right now. I would, before you embark on your project, though, become very friendly with your local veterinary association. I think that, many of them have animal welfare committees. So, just what we think they know, they don't know. And so it's just opening up those lines of communication with your Association of Board of Health Officers, as well as the MVMA, get them on board, just supporting the cause of trap, neuter, return, actively getting rabies vaccines out there in the community, spay, neuter. Do that before you are entering into the community. So create those networks earlier rather than later. It can't hurt to just get to know people sooner rather than saying, hey, here we're parked right next to your vet clinic, which I did with the Catmobile once. We literally parked right next door to a veterinary clinic in a very low income community, but the vet clinic was there, and the vet came out and he banged on the door and he was not happy. And we did not do a good job with that one.
Oh, other thought on that, and I don't know if you can speak more to it, is when we've done vaccine clinics with veterinarians. We've had them in the vet's office and had people come in at MRFRS anyway. Any thoughts on that in terms of that's a really direct partnership with the veterinarian?
Certainly, private practice veterinarians. I don't know if you're talking so there's, in springtime, there's a lot of vaccine clinics that are done. They kind of got skipped over during COVID, but the springtime rabies vaccination clinics, and those are done by private veterinarians, oftentimes in partnership with a nonprofit. And then also we've had them come into our adoption center, and and they've either volunteered or been paid for the day on doing those vaccine clinics, which are great outreach moments too. Sure, yeah. There are lots of different models out there for sure. I wish I had like a little virtual notebook, or I guess I now have to call it like a Google folder or whatever, with the templates on all these programs, so that then we could just access this and say, people could read through and go, hey, okay, I think this sounds like something I could do, or these different models. Because we've also had MASH clinics. The feral cat clinics have been in private practice clinics on a Sunday, so you could do a spay neuter clinic for 50 cats on a Sunday. So it's like private practice isn't sacrificing really anything other than by saying, maybe they've got one of their technicians there to let you in and close, but you come in, you do your stuff, you leave. They get great publicity, great acknowledgement, but it's not cramping their style during the week.
Interesting. I think that's almost it for questions. Is there anything you want to say in closing?
No, I just keep on letting me know your thoughts on this issue. I'd also love to know, what your challenges are, what you think is missing in your communities, to be able to kind of kick it up a notch. I think that is that like an Emerald Lagasse? I'm probably dating myself here. The BAM guy, sort of trying to kick it up a notch in your community as a way of trying to help. And honestly, one of the things as we're embarking on the holidays, actually one thing I have been thinking about too is, we are on Vet Tech Appreciation Week. This week is Vet Tech Appreciation Week. So, just make sure the veterinarians, the clinics that you use, say thank you to them, because they're in it with all of us. And, when we call, they might be like, oh gosh, it's you again, that kind of thing. And just, drop off a card, send them a card, a nice thank you, even with, we talked about with fundraising, but also with those that are helping us, send them a card. I sort of bake, so, but I'm not a cooker, but you can give them some cookies or something. It's the thought that counts, to be honest. And, I think we should all be respectful and say thank you. But I really feel very strongly that by having a lot of our programs assisting the owned cat population, I think it reduces barriers and overall helps us access cats in the community that we might not be able to access with our other programs. So I want to thank you all for being willing to listen to me today with this presentation. I feel very passionately about the community cat pyramid, so I really appreciate you just hearing me out.